Welcome to CosmoFactory, a podcast by Cosmoprof Worldwide Bologna, where we explore the entire cosmetics, personal care, and fragrance industry supply chain. I'm your host, Deanna Utrusky, and here at CosmoFactory, we look beyond the trends to discover the ideas, initiatives, and innovations that are truly advancing beauty. Let's get started. This episode is about emollients, biopolymers, and high-volume sustainable innovations. It's about the thoughtful and gradual replacement of synthetic cosmetic ingredients around the world. It's also about upcycling, circularity, biodegradable beauty, and more. My guest on this episode of the CosmoFactory podcast is Johannes Crotogino, Sustainable Innovation Platform Lead at BASF Personal Care. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Um, I think it's fair to say that environmental compliance has been an integral part of manufacturing for decades. But so-called green jobs, where executives and team leaders are tasked with improving the environmental sustainability of a whole company, a division, a product, or production line, these seem to be newer jobs. I know you've been with BASF for nearly 15 years. And the past couple of years in your current role, which I mentioned as I introduced you, it has the title of Sustainable Innovation Platform Lead. I'm curious if you can just talk about these newer titles. Did this role exist when you took it on?
Yeah, actually was for personal care innovation, that role has been specifically created.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, it's been created to make sure that there's, so to speak, one platform for the innovation of product groups that have very similar sustainability requirements. So it makes sense to look at those requirements across the board. So that's where it really had been created from scratch, yes.
Yeah, and your work is focused exclusively on innovations that are relevant to the cosmetics industry, but certainly there are a number of sustainability leaders throughout the company.
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, anyways, in most big companies, you probably have many of those functions looking at that. What I'm actually, my focus is completely on emollients, biopolymers, and emulsifiers for cosmetics. So I look after those innovation products that you could say that make up the big volumes in cosmetic products in the end.
Certainly, certainly. And can you give us a fuller picture of what you're responsible for in this role?
I mean, the role is basically to drive the innovation pipeline for those products.
Yeah.
So when you look at innovation, I mean, in personal care, it's a broad range of quite different requirements. So I need to analyze the market and understand what customers need, where the market is going, especially the global developments. So you have to get this comprehensive view of the market's going, also to inform our pipeline choices accordingly, right? And interestingly, you come across very similar requirements all the time again, like
Uh-huh.
across those different product groups too. So it's always biodegradability, it's always naturality. It's a question what it's made from, the raw material sources. So uh, that that really is part and parcel of that.
Excellent, excellent. And you did mention, maybe you already said it here, but you definitely told me before we started recording today that you're very much focused on developing ingredients that would serve as alternatives to silicones, polymers, select esters, so maybe ingredients like polyethylene glycol. Can you
Yeah,
say more about why you're targeting this particular group of ingredients?
yeah. I mean, there's a I mean pressing need for development of sustainability in all sorts of materials, but these ones, and I think silicones and I think synthetic polymers, what they have in common is that most of them are not biodegradable. I mean, silicones definitely are not at all biodegradable, and um, and both silicones and synthetic polymers are mostly also not bio-based, and
Mhm.
that's what's more is that if you look at an average cosmetic product, so it's emollients like mineral oils, silicones, polymers that you would find quite a lot of on the INCI list. So any difference you can make of those product groups will have a significant effect simply by the relatively large volume that you're looking at, right? So the aim is to find solutions that are biodegradable and bio-based, and at the same time give the cosmetic performance in products that the customers are used to.
Hmm.
So there are many product groups they have to look at, but I think what I'm doing is primarily to target these ones because there's really a lot to gain, you could say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point that the maybe the percentage of these sorts of ingredients in any given formulation is comparatively high. And we could extrapolate then from that that the use of these ingredients throughout the industry and the overall volume is relatively high compared to some, perhaps actives that are used in very small percentages. So if you get this right, the environmental impact will be much more impressive and practical. We need the
That's true. Yeah.
sustainability changes. Does that sound right?
No, would fully agree. That's absolutely true. And the more you can, let's say the more leverage is in targeting those ingredients, the more difference you can really make it. That's totally true. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it very much sounds like your work is about, the term we think of as defossilization, right? And then maybe, I guess, in terms of silicone, eliminating the carbon footprint that comes with mining and processing. Do you look at those sorts of details, I guess, in terms of carbon footprint numbers and that sort of um,
Sure. Yeah.
I
As
guess, carbon footprint of the inputs as well. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, as a company, we definitely do that. In the and also in the innovation of replacement options, that definitely is an important piece we have in mind. If you look at specifically silicones and let's say silicones, mineral oils, synthetic polymers, those big product groups, I think also one very important thing is that the biodegradability or the absence of biodegradability. So that seems to be really absolutely top of people's minds in the industry, understandably, because they're so uh, some of them at least are so far away. Some of these product groups, others are almost 100% or vast majority of them is bio-based, biodegradable. These ones are almost all are not biodegradable, and that's really something where the I would think the first focus would even be on that.
Yeah, no, that makes very good sense. It's clear that you and your colleagues are intent on developing both bio-based and biodegradable polymers, esters, silicone alternatives. But
Yeah.
certainly other ingredient makers and brand leaders are working to solve these same sustainability challenges. I know you can't see the future, but if you had to predict a timeline, how long do you think this industry-wide ingredient replacement will take?
That's a good question. It's hard to answer. I
Yeah.
think Yeah, I mean that's what really I think most of my work on a daily basis is about just to predict that because in I mean take many product groups already today, right? The personal care industry I think is offering a majority of products that are largely as I said, not fully bio-based, fully biodegradable, many emollients, many emulsifiers. But then some product groups are well, they can't be easily replaced. And I would think for most of them there are replacement options. It's just they don't perform the way in a cosmetic performance sense, the way that people are used to from those conventional synthetic products. So I think
Hmm.
that transition will definitely take years to come, and it'll spread with different speeds across also across geographies. And so many ways, I think it's a dynamic evolution if you want, because it depends a lot on which level that replacement solution is actually available. So what no one wants to settle for is a trade-off in performance, and of course, that solution has to be economically affordable. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's how you can put it. The speed of transition in a lot of ways is depending on how fast the industry comes up with more and more performing solutions. But it's definitely a process that it's in some cases has just really taken up speed and definitely will take years. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's interesting. You think about the trade-off in performance, and we hear a lot about cost as well. So that transition is definitely something
Yeah.
to be watching. You mentioned that it's a dynamic evolution. I like that expression, and that it's happening maybe at different paces in regions around the world. Can you comment on sort of how that race is going? I know we're all working to the same end. There shouldn't be a winner here, but we'll all win as we get there together. Who's making good progress here?
Yeah, that's a I mean to be honest, it's really obvious in most of those aspects. I would see that Europe is very much very much leading at least the developments that you see, right? And
Mm,
so is North America, and Asia is clearly is undergoing notable change in a lot of ways, but I think it's fair to say it's slower in this respect, the changes than in Europe and say North America. What I have to say, what I personally found surprising, and I learned that in South America too is a very small region. You have a considerable push also towards sustainable ingredients.
hmm.
In some cases, even more than in Western geography. So, and in Europe, you also have, I think you have a regulatory push. This
Right.
is one thing that comes on top, no? That makes Europe that puts pressure on European um, consumer good makers.
Hmm. No, I'm
Yeah,
glad you mentioned that because I do think, the regulatory component is very much driving innovation. Um, and, if we can reflect back on the question I asked you at the start of the interview, right? I think the idea that sustainable innovation, right, or sustainability is driving innovation, is a newer challenge. And so I guess I want to ask also about that transition from maybe a conventional innovation model to now, a sustainability driven innovation model. What sort of adjustments, would someone like yourself or your team have had to make to start thinking about innovation with this new framework?
that's a good question. I mean, what do you put first in your innovation briefings,
Yeah,
so to speak? Huh? What comes because you have a lot of things you have to look at the same time, and you can't do everything. That's unfortunately in driving an R&D pipeline.
yeah.
And so I think if you take these things first, like I said, no, biodegradability, bio-based content, other sustainability criteria, that already puts, let's say, a priority of many things that you have to do. And then it still has to work and shouldn't be less effective. Your new product shouldn't be less effective than the conventional product that's been around for a lot of the time. So I think um, this is really what has changed, so to speak. Because I mean, to be clear, I would say that I mean, call them bio ingredients, the biodegradable and bio-based alternatives. I would think they do not necessarily have to be better in terms of performance, like when compared to their synthetic counterparts. I mean, making them more natural and biodegradable is a, a very, very big challenge, to be honest,
Right.
in itself. No? So I think that's what I would describe the big change in. It transforms everyone's mindset. That's fair to say.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And from your perspective, would you say that your customer partners are ready to swap out conventional synthetics? Are they ready when you get these ingredients situated?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I think most customers, consumers too, they're looking for more sustainable ingredients, and they really mean it. And it depends on how convincing the bio alternative is, obviously. But personal care companies, I think, first and foremost, the bigger companies, they've definitely set themselves very ambitious targets.
Yeah,
I mean, for instance, when do they want to be out of non-biodegradables, right? And they have very ambitious targets. Then at the same time, the choice is largely depending, if you like, on yeah, what level of performance the alternative is. So yes, in customers are ready, and customers are also driving that that evolution very very strongly. Um, but yeah, as I said,
yeah.
it's probably a process of a couple of years.
Oh no, absolutely. It's promising, but it's definitely a big challenge. I hear that. We've talked a lot about the idea that the ingredients you're working to develop will be bio-based. So I'd like to think about the concepts of upcycling as well as bio waste. I'm wondering,
Hmm.
um, are those the methods you're using to source biomaterials that you're developing new ingredients with? And can you say, sort of where you're finding them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely is part of the focus, but I mean, if you start with how's a personal care ingredient made? Most of those ingredients they're made from. from available feedstocks. I mean,
Hmm.
such as, I mean, you have, let's say biopolymers. You're using a lot of the time you're using plant-based polysaccharides, things that are just out there in nature, and you can take from a side stream, or I don't know, emollients and emulsifiers, typically plant oils, plant fats. That's typically what they would come from. But the trick is actually to have a, I would say, a deep understanding of what you can do with those raw materials to develop solutions that allow for a high degree of performance. So it can be those, I would call them plain plant-based polysaccharides,
Hmm.
plain plant-based oils, and you can still do something very amazing uh, with them. But then, I mean, yeah, I mean, because you were alluding to upcycling
Yeah.
materials. I mean, we're looking around, and one thing is definitely biotechnological and fermentative routes. Although you typically would, most cases, you would need some precursor for those also. Um, and a special interest is, of course, upcycled ingredients, as such, clearly, yeah.
Yeah, no, and we hear quite a lot about upcycling from the food industry in particular, but you said you're looking around. Are there other industries where you're searching for these raw materials? The
All I
side
think,
streams, I guess?
yeah, yeah. I think it's fair to say I mean, in principle, everything, or it has to be plant-based, and that already narrows down your choice probably. So there's ideas on, I mean, food industry is definitely a very adjacent industry to ours.
Yes.
And another is, I mean, wood industry, you could think of that.
Mhm.
So everything, to make it, to put it that way, I think everything where you have a plant-based, a majority plant-based stream makes a lot of sense to look at. That's
Yeah,
that's how I
yeah.
would put it.
Yeah, no, I don't think you don't have to know the answer to this, but it makes me think about how, the textiles industry or the fashion industry is also um, something I see in the news, really endeavoring to make a difference in terms of their sustainability outcomes. And certainly there are some, plant-based fibers there. I wonder if beauty and fashion will team up on this.
You know
Um,
what, it's interesting you bring it because they have a lot in common. Sure, it's and also by the sourcing, by the if you look around in the industry, you look at events or exhibitions, you see those similar things very often popping up. So yeah, I think it's a good analogy.
yeah. And when we think about these different waste stream materials, how would they maybe affect the consistency or purity of the resulting ingredients? I know, especially with the scale of the ingredients that you're looking to offer, that would be a major consideration.
You mean the quality and the purity of yeah, okay, wait.
Yeah,
I think this, yeah, I mean, simple answer is there's nothing to compromise on when it comes to
right.
that. When it comes to quality and consistency, it's different requirements that you need, of course, depending on what kind of process you're doing. But this is the first thing we start with to make absolutely sure quality requirements are met, what people are used to from
Hmm.
let's say synthetic materials. So, yeah.
Right. So I guess I'm imagining then that it matters less on sort of the quality or purity of the raw material and maybe more about the processing that you put in place to develop the end ingredient.
It, it's hard to say. I think, well,
Okay.
it's hard to say. I think it's both. Definitely, you have to be very sure about the process, about of course the raw materials too, and they're natural materials, so that of course is a different thing than when you work with fossil. Um, but yeah, it's definitely both.
Yeah. The cost of sustainable innovations is always a factor, to be sure, especially, when new ingredients are introduced into the marketplace and companies are looking sort of for their first partners to take on a new technology.
Hmm.
I'm wondering how working with upcycled materials would affect the financial cost of a bio ingredient, and then, of course, the cost that
Hmm.
your customer partner would incur.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in upcycling, I would say in let me say in general with biomaterials, look with let's say biopolymers. It looks like for couple of fields, there may be a different use level. That's just part and parcel of the chemistry. I mean,
Okay.
that's just what it is, right? So you want to meet a specific performance or formulation requirement, and at some points you might have to, at least that's the point we are right now. You might, as the industry, you might have to use a little more, or a little less even sometimes, but that might differ.
Hmm.
So the ultimate goal is, of course, to offer solutions that they have to make sense economically. There's no other way. Otherwise, we wouldn't be successful.
Hmm.
But can the upcycled material help in getting the cost down? That's what we were thinking too. It's too early to say maybe, because I think, especially with upcycle, also with the bio ingredients, the I would think the main motivations that are center stage is like adding real value to a plant-based, to a bio waste, and how can you claim that? How can you uh, add so much value to something that, to make it a high value cosmetic ingredient? I think this is the prime motivation uh, to go upcycle, huh? To go bio.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes very good sense. We've also talked quite a bit about the idea of biodegradability. And I think you've done a pretty good job of explaining why biodegradable ingredients are the goal, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that because, I hear maybe we can call them industry pundits say that as long as an ingredient doesn't persist in the environment, if it's degradable by any means, that's
Hmm.
sufficient. So that there are definitely differing viewpoints here. Say more about the importance of biodegradability as it pertains to ingredients.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean I've heard that debate too. It's an ongoing debate on the maybe the
Yeah.
methodology, right? Like, is it whether let's say it's only readily biodegradable or inherently biodegradable, that's sufficient. I mean, the synthetic product groups that we talked about, they will mostly not meet either of those two biodegradability methods, right? Let's take an example. Your typical mineral oil, silicon oil, your synthetic polymer, most of them at least, they're not going to be biodegradable. Like, regardless of which of these methods you're using, so you would have to use probably other methods. And the sustainable replacement options that are being developed, they will, at least what we see right now in the industry, a lot of them will fall well into that area of biodegradability. So method wise, I think we already have a good fix on how we can place those. But you were asking about why is biodegradability so important? And I mean, on the one hand, it's the industry, definitely, and the companies and influencers and the community as a whole. We're all, pushing that direction. I mean, as a consumer, the idea that what you put on your skin, of course, wouldn't be remaining in the environment after it's been washed off. Okay, that's the one thing. I think on the other hand, you have a regulatory situation, and in Europe, for instance, it's really a big deal that for the first time a regulator has effectively set a ban on, let's say, on cyclomethacones, right? Your
Right.
cyclic silicones.
Yep.
I mean, there will be, in a couple of years from now, like 2 years or something, there won't be cyclomethacones in the European personal care market anymore, and that's a
Hmm.
big deal for the industry, of course.
Yes.
And the reason for that, and one of the main reasons for that, is that cyclomethacones are considered very persistent. Lawmakers have seen that and acted accordingly. So you really have, the other is probably microplastics, a bit more complex. It's a specific development of focusing on the particulate matter polymers, um, and that's also something that really it's something synthetic polymers can be affected by. I mean, most polymers used in cosmetics are rather soluble and swellable, and they're not plastic in the actual sense. But you can see really that regulators are also closing in, and it's making a real difference for suppliers as for consumer good makers. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And we've talked a lot about sort of what I would describe as the giant challenge that you and your team are facing. I'm curious if you have any ingredient innovation successes or progress that you can share with us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you look at the biopolymers we're doing, we have this Birdessence range, completely biodegradable. They really work on their base, let's say, on those plant-based polysaccharides. So that really is a group of products that really you can use today and be absolutely sure about biodegradability. Or look into emollients.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, kind of, right? I mean, we don't have. I think we don't in the emollients. We don't have that many non-degradables, but most of them are really made from plant-based oils, plant-based
Okay.
fats, and they degrade too. So it's quite a. I think the portfolio that we have is it's quite majority really is biodegradable and bio-based. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. But the work is ongoing, it sounds like.
it is. It is. We still definitely in those fields that we talked about earlier. There's still some way to go because you still have, let me say, you still have synthetic materials on the market that do a great job. I
Yeah.
mean, silicones come in every shape and form. They do a fantastic job. They're excellent in sensory and in many ways. How do you find an alternative that works maybe not exactly the same way, because by pure chemistry they might not ever work exactly with a carbon chemistry,
Sure.
but how do you come very, very close? And I think for cyclic silicones, for instance, the portfolio of, I mean, of biomaterials that bio-based materials that we have comes very close. You can really get very close in the sensory. Others are more challenging, but gradually you can get the performance very, very close on it. And one thing that really makes a difference is not just the individual ingredient, the
Mhm.
individual emollient, the individual biopolymer. It's really the application technology. So you have to have this understanding of what to combine with what. How does it work in that application field? And by combining all that, we can get amazingly close in some cases to the conventional, I should say, candidates.
Yeah, no, I love that. We often think about sustainability as a collaborative process. Rather, we know it takes everyone, and you're reminding us that the formulators will very much be involved as well. Johannes, I have to say, I have really appreciated your perspective, and I thank you so much for speaking with me here on the CosmoFactory podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you find the CosmoFactory podcast useful, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review and share your thoughts so even more cosmetic industry professionals can discover the CosmoFactory. I'm Deanna Utrusky. Please join me again next Tuesday for a new episode of the CosmoFactory podcast.